Imagine being a new congressman and walking into what remained of our democracy following that attack on January 6th. Metal detectors, mean tweets, death threats from your fellow members of Congress, the big lie. Congressman Troy Carter of Louisiana knows that journey all too well. He joins us now. Good morning, Congressman. As a new member, how did you feel about the attack on the Capitol after you were sworn in?
You know, as a student and teacher of democracy, it was heartbreaking to think of the nation's capital being under siege by its own people. It's something that our nation will never get over. The danger of having that type of domestic terrorism on American land is something that we could never fathom in a modern, organized democracy such as America. It's one of those things that you cannot add enough adjectives to describe the evil, the hate, and the disrespect that was displayed on that day.
Congressman, as African Americans, we walk two paths in this country. I remember when I first arrived in Washington, D.C., and I was awestruck by the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, Congress, looking at the White House and realizing these are the halls of power, and how am I possibly going to make a name for myself in this town? And then as a Black American, as an African American, I was struck by the humility of people like John Lewis and Elijah Cummings, who always had the time to treat me like the young guy that was coming up and teach me the ropes. Now it lies to people like you and Benny Thompson and others in Congress. And once again, Black America is being called on to fix something that we did not break. This was not Black Americans storming the Capitol on January 6th. And if you think about it, we had 8 years of peace and prosperity under Barack Obama. How do you feel knowing that that's what's been placed on your shoulders?
It's an enormous responsibility, one that I take very seriously. When I think about the steps that I walk in, the shadows that I follow, the incredible leaders that led before me, I feel a sense of humility, a sense of pride. You mentioned the great John Lewis or Elijah Cummings and so many others that that fought and sat in the very seats that I sit and walked the very halls that I walk. You can't help but feel a sense of responsibility and the huge good burden, if you will, good trouble, if you will, that we have as African American leaders to not only continue the great work that was done by our forefathers and mothers, but also to forge new ground, to continue to fight for the kind of equity and equality that in 2022 we still suffer a lack of. So it's a humbling experience. It's one that I'm very proud to shoulder. And on this day that we look back on the horrors of January 6, 2021, we're reminded that some are trying to whitewash this, to suggest it didn't happen, or somehow suggest that what you saw was not the violent insurrection that we know happened, and somehow to categorize it as exuberant tourist. Give me a break. If that crowd had been African Americans, you would have seen the bloodiest massacre on the steps of the Capitol. What's wrong with this picture? Justice is to be colorblind. Unfortunately, what we saw on January 6th was anything but. A president that was complicit, members of Congress that appear to have played a role. We're fortunate to have Benny Thompson, who's chairman of the Select Committee on January 6th, to vet and investigate, as he is so well doing in this bipartisan fashion, to identify those villains, those terrorists, and bring them to justice.
Congressman, I'm curious. We spend an awful lot of time in this town talking about Joe Manchin in West Virginia and trying to get him to do the right thing with regards to voting rights. You come from a state that is 34% Black. Is John Kennedy irredeemable? Can we bring him over to the side of understanding that if you don't help us vote, you won't get our vote in places like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama?
I will caution you by telling you that I'm a hopeless optimist, that I always look at the glass half full and I always look for the best in people. So I'm going to start by prefacing my comments there. Senator Kennedy is one that, if you know his history as I do, was once a very staunch liberal Democrat, and somewhere along the line, for whatever purposes, switched to become the conservative Republican that he is now. So we know somewhere in there, there's a heart. Somewhere in there, there's a philosophy that recognizes the importance of fairness for all people, regardless of race or party. So I'm hopeful that through our interactions that we'll continue to be able to pierce those parts of Senator Kennedy that once at least believed in the level of fairness that I do, that all people are created equal. Everyone deserves a right to the ballot box. One of the most sacred rights that we have as Americans is the opportunity to cast our vote for whoever we choose. And for us in 2022 to see Florida and Texas and other places that are desperately trying to roll back those rights, there's a problem. And I'm hopeful that Joe Manchin will do the right thing as a Democrat, Sinema as a Democrat. But my two senators from Louisiana, who happen to be Republicans, represent a state that that desperately needs the kind of fairness and equity that the country thirsts for. And I'm hopeful that Senator Kennedy and Cassidy will weigh in, as Senator Cassidy in a bipartisan way weighed in to help us pass the infrastructure bill.
You know what they say down there in Louisiana? Every batch of gumbo begins with a good, nice mix and a good, strong brew. Representative Troy Carter of the great state of Louisiana. Congressman, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you so very much.
And
God
so
bless you.